As I mentioned briefly in the previous video, we've been using Internet Explorer 9 in the lessons up until this point, but Internet Explorer 10 has a more full implementation of HTML5 forms, and I wanted to demonstrate that. Now, at the time when I'm recording this, Internet Explorer 10 is in a preview phase and can only be run from a preview version of Windows 8. So by the time you watch this, you might have the full version of Internet Explorer 10, and if so, you can easily follow along. Otherwise, you might just want to consider this a preview of what's to come. So prior to HTML5, a user would type data into form fields and then submit that form back to the server like we saw in the previous lesson. Now, all user input should be considered suspect. In other words, we should expect it to be guilty of being in the wrong format, contain the wrong range of valid values, and so on until it's proven innocent. Developers create code to perform validation of the data, sort of a first check of the data to make sure that it contains values in the desired range, that a required field of information wasn't left empty, whether it was numeric, alphanumeric, or conforms to some pattern like an email address or URL, or it has at least one item selected from a list, and so on. So these validation checks could take two forms. There's validation on the server side that's written in code logic like C#, Visual Basic, Perl, PHP, or whatever back-end server technology is required. On the front end, on the client, developers would also create validation checks of JavaScript. Typically is used for this purpose to perform some preliminary checks. So why do you check the data in both places, both on the front end and on the back end? Well, the idea is to reduce the time for feedback to the end user. In other words, to avoid a full post back to the server, and then we get to tell the user as quickly as possible why the form could not be submitted. If the user has JavaScript disabled on their web browser, then no problem. The server would be check would be performed with nearly identical validation on the form submission before proceeding then with additional logic, saving them to a database, or whatever the case might be. However, in HTML5, no JavaScript is necessary to perform validation checks on the client, again, if the browser supports it. So what we want to do here is, again, using the beta version at the time of this recording, I have lesson 11. You should be able to download this zip file from wherever you downloaded this video, or you're currently watching this video. And there will be, just like before, a before, after, and a work folder. In the before folder, there's simply a lesson 11.html. I'm going to copy that and paste it back over here in the work folder, where I'm going to do all of my work. And I'm going to open this up in Notepad, and you can see that, well, just for fun, I went ahead and make sure this isn't a viewable area here. I added some CSS right into the head section of our document. So just ignore this. You'll see it as we begin to work with the form, how it formats it. Okay. So let's start off with some of the new input types that are available to make your job a lot easier. Let's start with an email. So paragraph, a label, and then I'm also going to use a span just for styling purposes. Input. Okay, so input type equals email. Name equals email input. And I'll also make this a required field. So notice that attribute. I can just turn it on like that. And then I'll go ahead and close the label. And then close the paragraph. Okay, hopefully you got that. All right, so now let's save this, and let's see it opened up in Internet Explorer. All right, so let's try to submit this form, and it says, what? This is a required field. I didn't write any JavaScript, did no styling to get this little red box highlighted around the input box, did nothing to get the little pop-up bubble. This is probably stylable. I haven't gone quite that far with this example. However, let's go ahead now, since it's a required field, let's go ahead and try to type something in, like just junk, all right, and click submit, and it says you must enter a valid email address. Wow, that's awesome. So let me send it to an email address I never checked, so don't even bother sending an email here because it won't work. And Now we try to submit it. It tried to submit the form. Clearly we don't have anything to submit it to, but at least it passed the validation check and continued on. Okay, so great. So type equals email. Very neat. What other kinds of specific types are there? Well, right now in the specification there's one called telephone, or TEL. It's a little bit of a different case though. We're not going to get quite the satisfaction out of it. And I'm just going to type out this note. Oddly, the spec says the browser should do nothing special. And then I'm going to just go, that sounds kind of weird. But if that's what the specification says, let's see how this behaves. So let's go ahead and put bobtabor@yahoo.com to pass that check. And here we're just going to put in some random numbers and then click submit. And it goes ahead and takes it. So unfortunately, there's really nothing all that special about type equals tel, but it is supported, and I wanted to point it out. At least semantically, you would know that this input box was for the purpose of the telephone, but it doesn't have any inherent validation capabilities. Okay, let's move on to something that is a little more interesting. We'll start with a label, another span, whoops. And let's create a URL input. Input type equals URL. Name equals URL input. Just the name I'm giving it, and I am going to make this required. And finish it up like that. All right, so let's save that. And let's see that one in action. All right, so here we go. We'll just go and put some random numbers in there, and then here we'll just put some random text and go ahead and click submit, and it says you must enter a valid URL. So let's just go www.learnvisualstudio and then just click submit, and it says you must enter a valid URL. It won't take it because it requires .com, .net, .co.uk, whatever the case might be, and apparently, it needs http:// too, I believe. Yes, okay, so there, passed validation. Excellent. All right, and so now moving on, let's try another one here. In fact, let's go H2. In fact, I forgot some H2s around here. Bear with me for a second here while I catch up. We'll call this URL. Here we're going to call this numeric values. And the first one we'll do is number input, and here we'll add our input type equals number, name equals number input, and required. Okay. Let's see how that looks. All right, so let's go ahead and type in tabor@yahoo.com. Just put some numbers here. Let's go HTTP keys on bing.com, just to make it short. And then a numerical input. Let's just put some crazy combination of numbers and letters, and it accepted it. Let's try just some text information. All right, so let's just type in something, some letters here, and then click submit. And notice that it doesn't really give us a message about numeric values. It just kind of empties it out and said this is a required field. If I type in a real number, it'll go ahead and let it submit. So I think this might be a function of the fact that this is a preview release. They're probably still tweaking some of the bits of functionality, but at least it is supported from a validation purpose. All right, let's move on. There's another kind of interesting one called a range input that I like how it's rendered in Internet Explorer. And I'm going to set its pre-selected value to 42. And I'm just going to say off to the side, value set to 42. By default, values accepted are between 1 and 100, just so you know. Okay, so let's see this in action, assuming I typed it all correctly. And notice how it's rendered here as kind of a progress bar. It's a range bar, so here I can, as I move the number, notice the little box overhead, and again it goes from 0, I said between 1 and 100, it's actually 0 and 100. Let's go ahead and change that just for posterity. Great, very cool. Alright, so let's move on now, and I want to demonstrate another cool little thing here. It's called a data list. And you might have, for example, a need for a combo box, which is kind of like a text input box, kind of like a select box, but it'll let you type in different values from what is in the selection box that drops down. So it's different than the typical select that we saw in HTML in the previous HTML forms in the previous lesson. So here, let's do this. And I'll go to the next line here. Input type equals text. So we're just going to use a normal text box, and we're going to set a property called list to something called some list. And I'm going to define a data list, and I'm going to set the ID equal to some list to link these two together. So the ID of this data list is some list, and I'm going to reference it here in my input type equals text. And let's close our data list, and in between our opening and closing data list, I'm going to create a number of options. Option label equals first, value equals, all right. All right, we'll do second and third. Okay. And now let's see this in action. Or actually, let me finish this up. All right, so let's try this out now. Go down the bottom here. And you can see that whatever is in the value field will be displayed here in the list. So I can just escape and say I want to type in fourth, but as I typed in the F, it limited the list down to just those, and then I could use the arrow key to select one and then use the tab key, or I'm sorry, let's try that again, the first, and then just hit the enter key to select the given item in the data list. Okay, pretty cool. All right, so in addition to all these new HTML5 controls, there are a number of new attributes that you can apply that are kind of global in nature and can be applied to just about any of the controls. So for example here, let's create another quick example. And here is autofocus. So we'll just create an input type equals text, and then we'll use this autofocus, or we could set it autofocus equals true. We'll just use it like that, for example, and then slash label slash p. Okay, save it, and now let's refresh. And notice that the cursor automatically goes to the autofocus. So this is where we would begin typing in our form. We can use the Shift Tab or Tab key to move on from there. All right, but at least autofocus will put the cursor into a specific form field so the user can begin typing as soon as the page loads. Pretty cool. Let's go on from there and look at pattern. And we'll use a pattern that I've basically already created. Truth be told, I stole it off the internet, so if you see this floating around, don't be alarmed. Okay, so this is for, let me do this. Hint, use a valid or invalid zip code. So it'll either work with a 5 or 9-digit zip code. And let me just quickly fill in this. Put anything in there. http://bing.com. Leave that selected. Down a second. The autofocus. Alright, so here we go. Bob Tabor at yahoo.com. Just put some numbers in there. educationmatters.com. Number. Autofocus. We'll just type anything. Doesn't really matter. And here in the pattern, let's go ahead and just type in too many numbers and click the submit button. And it says you must use this format. Now it doesn't show the format, but if I were to do just 5 numbers, it'll take it. Okay, awesome. All right, moving on. We can also use this, and I see this effect used often, this placeholder. So we're going to set the placeholder property to just hello world. And this is different than an initial value that we could default our form fields to. This will actually disappear as we start typing. So it's useful for giving a hint inside of a form field. Let's see if we can get back there real quick. Okay, see, it's kind of in a grayed out font, hello world. As we put our mouse cursor inside of it, it disappears. So it's there just for a contextual hint. And moving on, we've already looked at the required field, so I'll just go ahead and put that in there for reference sake. But we've already seen that one at work earlier. And let's move on to the next one, which will be the step. So here we're going to use type equals number. This is specific for number. And I'll just type a hint. Must be divisible by 5. Alright, so this is the last one, and let's fill out our form one more time. Placeholder, let's type anything we want in there. Required, anything we want in there. Alright, step. So I'm going to type in 74, and then I click submit, and it says you must enter a valid value. Alright, but if I type in 75 and click submit, it'll take it. Okay? Alright, so again, coming down the pipe, And there are others that are defined in the HTML5 specification that are exciting, and I'm sure over time they will be included as well. And so it's kind of a great time to be a web developer because it takes less and less code to accomplish just as much as it would require to use a bunch of custom JavaScript to accomplish these same sorts of things. All right, great. So I think that pretty much wraps up our discussion of HTML5 proper. We're going to move on to CSS beginning in the next video. We'll see you there. Thank you.